Ya Ali Madad, today is day 3 of Mediation Awareness Week, and our conversation is going to center around family harmony. The family is the most important foundational piece for our society overall. When the famed anthropologist Margaret Mead was asked by her student what she thought was a seminal indicator of human civilization, the student expected her to say something about a particular tool or a frame or something, pottery. But in fact, the answer that Margaret Mead gave at that time was that what she looked for as a starting point of human civilization was the presence of a healed femur bone. Because a break of a thigh bone, the femur bone, is not something that anyone can survive without support. The fact that there is a healed femur bone indicates that someone took care of that person, carried that person to safety, fed them, protected them, and looked after them while that big bone healed. That is the essence of family. From that time to today, our families are the very basis of our survival and our well-being. And that is one of the reasons why when families come to us in distress, when that relationship is frayed, we in the CAB system understand that that person or those people are in very deep pain. And that is one of the reasons why we make sure that we focus on healing, even if the family never comes together to live together. That personal healing is extremely important in the context of family relationships. We also have to pay particular attention to cultural sensitivity, cultural practices, and nuances, because they too are very much a part of our essence. In 2015, when Syrian Murids had to leave the chaos in Syria and make their way to Europe, that stress of the refugee experience, migration, economic hardship, family separations, the adjustment to a new culture made a lot of distress in many families. To respond to that, we as the CAB system needed to take some immediate adaptive actions. And we sent one of our trainers, Mahmoud Dayoub, to Ghent, Belgium, to work with a team and prepare to assist Murids in that area. I'm very pleased to have the conversation with Mohammed today. Yani Madad Mohammed.
Maulana Ali Madad. And thank you so much for having me in this Mediation Awareness Week.
So let's start with this conversation. What was it that we were trying to respond to when you were sent to Ghent to take care of situations there for us?
Yeah, as you know, the war in Syria started in March 2011, but most of the Syrian refugees, and I'd like to call them newcomers, they came in 2015, and they had a very difficult and dangerous journey from Syria to reach Europe. And when they arrived to different European countries, they thought that their problems must have an end, but this was a start for new problems, if we can say, the problems, the challenges of living in new societies, the challenge of learning the local language, the challenge of living in different culture. Also, in addition to the problems they brought with them from their home country, because the war affected everyone, And I can tell you also from my experience, because I myself also newly arrived Murid, and I came in 2015, and I'm living now in the Netherlands. And why Ghent? Because in Ghent, in Belgium, most of the Syrian Murids, they choose to live in this city so they can help each other. But in the same time, because most of the Syrian Murids are living in this city, we had a lot of cases, a lot of disputes, a lot of problems. And for this reason, we needed to address this problem. And thanks to ICAP, I was sent to Ghent with another trainer to deliver training for a team of 6 people who are Syrians, who are living in Ghent. And we could deliver this training, MCTP, Mediation and Conciliation Training Program. And not only that, but this was followed by a kind of coaching. So I could mediate 2 cases, and I involved some of these, 3 of these 6 people there. And by this, we could address this problem, and we could help in solving the disputes in this city.
That's great. And from your perspective, what do you think were some of the essential reasons why this intervention was successful? What were the factors that contributed to the success?
Yeah, in my opinion, the most important that people who are understanding the culture, who are speaking the same language, and maybe in my case that they had the same problems. So in this regard, the intervention was very successful because we could address the issue and we could make a difference. And this is it wasn't only for Ghent, because I am also a UK INCAB member, and also from my position, I can also address any disputes in Europe in general, in the countries relating to UK Council mandate. And I am able to speak the same language, and I am aware of their problems. So I think for this reason, we are successful.
That is very good. And of course, with your involvement, you're able to help us learn about the Syrian culture along the way. And so overall, all of us grow from that experience of having that cultural connection with people from Murids coming in from all over the world. It's a very important gift to have that sense of collaboration. Thank you very much, Mohammed.
Thank you so much.
The COVID-19 situation has raised so many additional factors for us and the world at large to deal with. No one could ever have predicted that these are some of the circumstances that we have to address. COVID has not been an equal opportunity virus. It has had an impact much more significantly on women and minorities. The United Nations has indicated that in the last 6 months since the COVID started, family violence has increased exponentially around the world. Even prior to COVID-19, family violence was a significant issue and problem. Estimates suggest that 1 in 3 women are subject to domestic violence, and 1 in 4 men would be also subject to domestic violence. It's an issue that has a long-standing history. But COVID-19 has made that situation much worse. The United Nations calls domestic violence as a shadow pandemic, a pandemic within a pandemic. To ensure that we are ready to assist members of our Jamaat facing that particular problem, I'm pleased to have the conversation with NCAB Chair for the United Kingdom, Yasmin Dunji, who has been working on this issue for a while. Yali Madat Yasmin.
Malani Madat, Chairman Zuli. It's lovely to see you, and thank you for having me at the Mediation Awareness Week.
Thank you. So Yasmin, we've been working, and the NCAB in the United Kingdom has been working on the issue of domestic violence in collaboration with sister institutions for a long time.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what NCAB UK has been doing and what you think would be lessons we can learn from that.
Sure. As we all know, domestic abuse is a deep-rooted problem which has affected society over centuries. And my work as a family doctor has also made me more aware of the consequences of domestic abuse, because on a daily basis, we come across our patients who have suffered with domestic abuse and how it has affected the family harmony, and in particular, how it affects the children. Having then joined NCAB, we also realized that our casework, one of the key root causes was spousal, child abuse, and mental health. So in view of that, we felt we should really start tackling this in collaboration with our sister institutions. So the Domestic Abuse Task Force was established in 2017, and the objectives were to first establish, does domestic abuse happen within our Jamaat? And if it does, to what extent? So what we did is we looked at all the casework which had been dealt with and identified the percentage that suffered with domestic abuse, the types of abuse, the cultural background of the victims and the offenders, and how it in particular affected the children and the impact on the family at large. Mm-hmm. So we took a phased approach. That was the first phase. Having established that, we are now in the process of developing strategies in collaboration with our sister institutions, and particularly raising awareness within the Jamaat. And I believe that during the pandemic, there has been about 35% increase in cases of domestic abuse. And that has given us the platform to start addressing this within the Jamaat at a different level.
Mm-hmm.
Our Jamaat must also be suffering.
Indeed, we are part of the whole worldwide community. There should be no reason to expect that we would be immune from something that affects the rest of the world. So with the COVID situation and the fact that we are not seeing people face to face, and perhaps they're having harder time reaching us and actually even going outside their family homes, how are we addressing that reality?
Obviously, during the lockdown is easing now, but it's, we may have a second spike, and it's already started being reinitiated. There have been difficulties in basically victims of domestic abuse seeking assistance and help. So the National Domestic Abuse Helpline, in fact, increased its telephone lines. The government has invested extra funds to help the refuge, the charity refuge, and it is really the whole concept of domestic abuse has come to the forefront. In fact, within the UK, we've got the Domestic Abuse Bill of 2019 to 2020, which was passed through the first stage in Parliament on the 7th of July. So I think at large, there has been a lot of awareness on domestic abuse within England and Wales.
Mm-hmm. And I understand October is Domestic Abuse Month in the United Kingdom?
So the Domestic Violence Awareness Month was established by the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence in 1981. At that time, it was called the Day of Unity. But since 1987, it has actually taken on a whole month of domestic violence awareness. And in fact, it was Senator Joe Biden at that time in 1994 who was involved in the Violence Against Women's Act, which was passed. So, the world at large is taking the issue of domestic abuse more seriously.
Seriously, indeed. And the impact of it is so much more long-standing, isn't it?
It is. You see anxiety, depression, post-traumatic distress syndrome, and in particular in children, behavior problems, poor performance at school, and many, many others which can impact a child's future.
And many people think that, domestic violence means you're actually beating up a person physically, but it's much more than that, isn't it?
No, it's not only physical, it's emotional, it's psychological, it's pressure tactics, sexual abuse, even online abuse. That's really becoming more prevalent. And financial control. We see quite a lot of cases where there is financial control, stalking, belittling, name calling. All those are definitions. I mean, the definition of domestic abuse was widened in the UK in 2012. So it's quite a wide definition, including coercive behavior. So
exactly. So, Yasmin, if there was someone watching this program today and says, I'm worried about a family member, what advice would you give that individual?
Yeah, what I would say is speak to that individual, ask them to open up, speak up, and tell them that you will maintain confidentiality. And there's assistance available from our institutions and external organizations.
Indeed. I think if the message is, please seek help and reach out, because the consequences of family violence go much, much, much further than immediate wounds that are healed. It is a long-standing and deeply destructive practice. Thank you, Yasmin. Is there anything you want to say?
Yes, what I would like to say is that, both the victim and the offender need assistance, need help, and help is available. Help is available for both the victim and offender through counseling, anger management. We've got resources within the institutions and external links that we can use. And I would say to that person to break the silence, seek help, and end the cycle. May I please end with a hadith from our Prophet Muhammad?
Indeed.
Hadith of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him and his progeny. Among the believers who show most faith are those who have the best disposition and are kindest to their families.
Indeed. It certainly is a recognition of how important family is to our lives overall. Thank you, Yasmin, for your participation in this one.
Thank you.
COVID-19 has been a very interesting dynamic for all of us. It's not just in areas of extreme responses in family situations, but our day-to-day lives have been upended by COVID-19. From lockdowns to being cooped up with our families, each one of us has had to adapt to a new way of life within our families. I am delighted to have a conversation with my colleague on ICAB, Mr. Rahim Molu, who joins me from New York. Hello, Rahim. It's really so interesting for me to be able to have these conversations from people all over the world. I'm just quite amazed at the way in which the technology has made our lives change. From your perspective as a partner in a large law firm in New York, as a professor at Columbia University, and contact with many young people and people you're working with, as well as some of the literature and research that's coming out, what are some of the long-term implications on what we need to be aware of in how we interact with each other in our families and our lives overall from this COVID-19 situation?
There will be many, I think, long-term implications, some good and some more troubling. And, I think from the perspective of what we're discussing today, some of the more troubling aspects relate to the inequitable sort of impact that COVID-19 is having, as you mentioned earlier. In particular, for example, we've all been cooped up in our homes, like you said, and that does oftentimes have an inequitable impact on the mothers in the family having to deal with children who are now online schooling, or in some instances not online schooling, but at home, not at school, and now having to take care of those children. That oftentimes falls more to the women than it does to the men, for a variety of reasons, cultural included. A second group of people that we need to be aware of, and unfortunately it's having an inequitable impact on, are those in lower socioeconomic positions, and oftentimes those end up being minorities within our societies as well, for a number of reasons. One is, the economy's been hard hit. A lot of folks have lost their jobs, and those jobs that have been lost tend to be in the sectors where those in the lower socioeconomic classes have been more adversely impacted. So, for example, the hospitality industry, the retail sector, record number of bankruptcies in both of those sectors in various parts of the world, unemployment numbers reaching to double digits. And so, those segments of the economy and of the population are being even harder hit from an economic perspective. And the third is our children. And again, this is exacerbated from a socioeconomic divide perspective. While there are some schools that have developed online schooling modalities and are able to sort of adjust from a pedagogical perspective, there are others that haven't. And so, globally, there are some parts of the world that you can't go back to school because they don't have the tools, or they don't have the technology, or folks don't have fast enough internet connections at home. And so, in 6 years from now, I think of my own children, who are lucky enough to be able to be online schooled when the need arises. They're going to have 6 months to a year more of schooling than children their age in other parts of society. And that has a major impact when you're talking about standardized testing, for example, that allows you entry into college. Having 1 year less school, you can imagine the impact that has on a long-term perspective. So unfortunately, it is having it's spreading that divide between the haves and the have-nots in many ways, including the three I just mentioned.
And Rahim, what do you think individual families can do to mitigate some of that reality?
I think part of it is trying to identify who within the family is being more adversely impacted, whether it's a particular person within the family who has had to bear the burden of, for example, childcare more than someone else, and I think being empathetic, and looking around you and seeing how is this impacting different people in different ways. It's very easy, when you're being adversely impacted to look at yourself and say, look, I'm being affected in all of these ways. But I think it's really important that we look around, not just to our immediate family members, but to our extended family members, and asking ourselves, are there folks within our circles that are having that are facing more of a burden than others? And what can we do to help those people? What can we do to help them, either helping cook a meal for an extended family member once a week, or maybe taking the children from them a couple of evenings to give them a bit of a break. So I think it's really just being aware of the folks around you and how they're being impacted.
Mm-hmm. And there are sort of two messages that we are hearing all the time about making sure that we use this opportunity to prepare for ourselves for the post-pandemic time that'll come. And eventually this lockdown will end, and at some point we will get out of this. But when the burden of the current pandemic is inequitable, it's very hard to prepare for that future, right? To take advantage of online learning things. And what do you think would be the implications of that down the road?
There are no easy answers. I think we're lucky that there are certain tools, right, to be able to cope with these things that I think, on the positive side, will be here to stay. So, for example, being able to do the kinds of things we're doing right now, right? There are going to be resources available that have been accelerated in terms of accessibility to resources, right? So for example, counseling sessions being done online, resources like classes and access to education being done online, so you can access top-notch resources no matter where you are in the world. So there are additional resources that are being, I would say, accelerated in terms of their accessibility as a result of this. Now, there are still some fundamental barriers like access to technology, et cetera, that we need to overcome before we can even access those resources. But I think we need to think about, what are those resources that are becoming available? It's happening at such a rapid pace that those that can uptake those resources and become familiar with those resources more quickly will be the ones to inevitably access them, have more ready access to them and quicker access to them. So I think we need to be thinking about what are those resources that are becoming available? How do we access them? How can we help our Jamaati members access them? And in that sense, get ahead in a way that they might not have been able to access them prior to the pandemic.
Right. And from a CAB hat on, what are some of the disputes that we should be preparing for and anticipating will emerge out of this pandemic period of time?
And we've already seen some of these disputes, unfortunately, show up in terms of the kinds of disputes that are arising. Again, I would maybe suggest that there are three groups. One is because we're forced to be, for better and for worse, in some cases, cooped up with our family members. It gives us obviously more opportunity to spend with our family, which is great. On the other hand, when there are underlying issues in terms of familial relationships, you can't hide them, right? There's no escape. You don't have an outlet to relieve those tensions by going to work or play a sport or meeting up with family, extended family or friends. You have to confront those issues, and sometimes that deepens the fissures. And I think that's when you start to see, problems and sort of the tipping point, as it were. And so you do see, as we discussed with Chairman Yasmin, increases in domestic abuse. You see increase in divorce rates. In some jurisdictions, it's double the rates of divorce in per month during the pandemic time period. You see, that tension between parents and their children, because children now need, attention that they didn't, that school was otherwise giving them. And so you see family disputes, unfortunately. A second group is you see commercial disputes with people losing their jobs. They're not able to pay rent. And so or they're not able to owe money to family members or to the bank or to pay their car loan or whatever it might be. So you see an increase in those types of commercial disputes. And likewise, business disputes. Not able to pay rent when you own a restaurant, for example, might mean that you have to shut your business down. You may have a partner that is, that you end up in a commercial dispute. So you see commercial disputes arising because of the economic situation that results from this. And then a third category, which I think is interesting, is you're seeing lifestyle disputes. And this really is a clash of, some have classified as sort of different cultural and lifestyles. Those who are, it's been categorized as sort of tighter in their lifestyles and others who are looser. And it's oftentimes that is a cultural divide. So for example, in jurisdictions where you have more natural disasters, they tend to live tighter lifestyles. They're used to having to cope with those natural disasters, to shut down, to protect their family members, etc. In other places in the world, due to whether it's government regulation or otherwise, you have more looser cultures, and you start to see, and within family members, you have different elder people in our Jamaat who feel more susceptible to the virus might have a sort of tighter attitude versus the looser attitude. And you start to see people blaming one another, right? The folks who have the tighter sort of mentality will blame those with the looser mentality to say, this is why we have a spread of the pandemic. And you have those with, sort of a more looser mentality saying, well, those with the more tighter mentality, that's the reason why we have this economic crisis. And you see this sort of blame game because of your own tendency, and which is a result of your own experiences. And so these sort of lifestyle disputes are being exacerbated because it is very much now that your lifestyle decision affects my life in a way that it wasn't the case prior to that.
Thank you. Thanks very much. This has been a very interesting conversation, Rahim. Thank you. Well, this brings us to the end of day 3 of Mediation Awareness Week. I hope that we have conveyed to you how important it is to be mindful of the realities of our family life, to ensure that within that family situation, justice and equity play an important role, because it is in that way in which we address this particular pandemic that the safety and progress of our Jamaat will also be impacted. We've enjoyed these conversations. I hope that you have found something in this to have a conversation with your own family about how you can make your life together an even more enjoyable, meaningful, and fulfilling experience. Do join us tomorrow for day 4 as we talk about global migration issues and global endeavors. Thank you, and Ya Ali Madad.